Hello, Connor Echols.
Hey Bob, how you doing?
I can't complain. Well, actually, I could complain. Some things have gone wrong in the world. I mean, for starters, at the local level, um, there's supposed to be a third person here. My
Right.
usual counterpart on Earthling Unplugged, which this is an edition of, Andrew Day, apparently is temporarily victim of this storm that has deluged the southeastern United States. We think maybe he doesn't have electricity or something. He was going to be on here, and we were going to introduce you as our mystery guest
Mhm.
because you, like Andrew, are at the Nonzero Newsletter, and you've written this great piece on Alex Karp that's at the newsletter. You can Google Nonzero and Substack and read it. What is it? Anatomy of a Silicon Valley Hawk?
Anatomy of a Silicon Valley Hawk. Yeah, profile of Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir and one of the most unusual people I've ever come across.
I would almost call unusual a euphemism, but I will leave it for people to discover that by going to the newsletter. Now, meanwhile, in terms of other forms of havoc in other places, uh, I just found out within the last hour that Israel has targeted the leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah. I get the sense they've succeeded in killing him. They certainly killed some other people. They virtually destroyed, a neighborhood's worth of buildings to do it. Um, and that's actually kind of relevant to the first item in the Earthling, the Nonzero Newsletter, but also it's relevant to your own area of expertise. As it happens, you speak Arabic. You're a student of the Arab world. You spent a year in Jordan. A couple years ago, after you were at the newsletter at Nonzero for like 9 or 10 months as an intern, went to Jordan,
Right.
went to Responsible Statecraft, the Quincy Institute's thing, and now you've recently joined us as managing editor as part of our plan to eventually dominate the entire media landscape.
Slowly but surely.
Uh-huh. And you're in charge of that. Did I forget to tell you that? That's
Oh, damn. Okay. Well, I got some catching up to do.
okay, that's your responsibility. So anyway, as for this Nasrallah thing, first of all, I mean, in terms of the how escalatory this is on Israel's part. I mean,
Yeah.
Israel's done a number of things that were escalatory. You know, hitting an Iranian embassy compound in Syria, assassinating the political leader of Hamas on Iranian territory, and so on. But this guy's the leader of Hezbollah, which is not just um, not just a militia, right? It's like a political party. So he's the head of a political party that like has seats in the parliament in Lebanon?
Yeah, so Nasrallah is and has been for a long time the leader of Hezbollah, right? And for a little perspective, listeners to the podcast have heard this before, but Hezbollah kind of was formed during Israel's occupation of Lebanon in the 80s, basically in opposition to the Israeli presence. And Nasrallah has been a major figure in that movement basically ever since. And Hezbollah is basically so the system in Lebanon gives a certain amount of seats and a certain amount of representation to different religious groups, to different confessional groups. And Hezbollah has been the dominant Shiite group for a long time in Lebanese politics. So this is both a very powerful militia, probably more powerful than the Lebanese army itself, and one of the most prominent political parties in the country.
Mhm. And roughly speaking, governance is divided kind of in three ways. There are specific positions
Right.
reserved for a Christian, a Sunni, and a Shia. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So it's the president, the prime minister, and the speaker of parliament that are divvied up between the three. And yeah, so I mean, this is if they have indeed succeeded in killing Nasrallah today, it'll have pretty huge reverberations. I mean, in a country that's already, it really bears emphasizing just how bad life in Lebanon was, even more than a year ago, even before these issues started happening between Israel and Hezbollah, right? The government has been basically completely collapsed for the last several years. There's really basic social services not existing. It's dire, and this has the potential to make it that much worse.
Yeah, and what, there's a lot of hostility in Lebanon toward Hezbollah, I gather, not
Yeah.
so much on the part of Shia, I guess, but, they were in 2006, they got involved in a big kind of war with Israel. Israel wreaked devastation upon the landscape, and Nasrallah kind of half apologized afterwards, right?
Mm.
For bringing that on the country?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, it was terrifying, right? You know, any Lebanese person you talk to remembers 2006 as a major drama.
Uh-huh.
Uh, you know, it's the first major military kind of issue because, you know, Lebanon had this terrible civil war. Some might remember from about 1975 to 1990. 2006 was kind of felt like the return of the worst things from their past. And this feels like another return of that, right? So there's going to be a lot of people who are mad at Hezbollah as well,
Well,
for
that
sure,
was
for
my
helping to
question.
attack
I
us.
mean, uh so is there kind of nothing that could unify Lebanon at this point around Hezbollah? Um
Mm, that would be a real stretch. That would be a real stretch. Picturing like people that are Christian or Sunni supporting Hezbollah would be really unusual. I mean, it's just the tensions between these communities are so deep. I mean, you even think like, you know, it goes down to schooling even, right? There's an interesting kind of fact about modern Lebanese schooling, which is that when they teach, they don't actually teach the Civil War in public schools, even though this is this incredibly momentous event, because it's produces so much anger, so much frustration between the communities that it's left to the Christians to teach the Christian narrative,
mhm,
the Sunnis to teach the Sunni narrative, the Shiites
mhm,
to teach the Shia narrative. So that is like the level of political distinction drawn between these groups.
mhm.
So no, I can't imagine them rallying together.
So there will be no unified a kind of military response against Israel. Of course, the government's military is not nearly as strong as Hezbollah anyway, right? That is the
Yeah,
strongest military in Lebanon. I gather Israel has done significant damage to it over the last week or two, starting with the pager attacks, which sent it into a certain amount of organizational disarray, which Israel then kind of capitalized on by following that up with airstrikes that were presumably more successful than they would have been had there not been um, that disruption. So there's
yeah.
been a lot of degradation of Hezbollah's capacity, but I guess it's just very. First of all, before we talk about what kinds of things Hezbollah might do in response, or what kinds of things Iran might do in response, do you have any sense for how degraded Hezbollah's capacity is?
I mean, my guess is as good as anyone's, right? But it it seems clearly true, right? When we think about the nature of the attack, that this has clearly badly, you know, degraded their communications, their organization, right? Because if they were afraid to use other types of devices and they were relying on the pagers and the walkie-talkies, then the only logical conclusion is that they are not able to communicate in the ways that
Hmm.
they want to. And I think one indication to kind of favor that interpretation is that Hezbollah has not released as many missile strikes into Israel as you might have expected in these last couple of days, at least as much as I would have expected, right? Because you know, they've been kind of sitting on this massive stockpile of missiles and really conspicuously not using it to great effect. And so this would be a pretty obvious opportunity, these, you know, last 2 days of escalation, to start using them, and they haven't. So maybe they just don't have the ability to actually coordinate those attacks right now.
Well, and Israel, I think, has destroyed a fair number of launchers since the pager attack.
Yeah.
I think the actual, physical capacity is degraded to some extent. Um, I also think that, you know, Hezbollah is constrained by concern about how the larger Lebanese public will respond if Israel once again wreaks devastation on the entire land, right? And
Right.
I mean there are various theories about what Israel's been up to with all this escalation, especially in the last week with respect to Lebanon. One theory was they just want to start what, from their point of view, would be kind of the final war where they, in their imagination, somehow eternally neutralize Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran or something. and I'm sure they'd like to draw the U.S. in if possible. In any event, the U.S. would provide some aid and assistance. Another theory that I was kind of partial to for a while was um, that Israel would settle for Hezbollah stopping the rocket fire in northern Israel. And they know that although that would, in one sense, be easy to do, they could just stop the war in Gaza. Israel could, and the rockets would stop. For that matter, they could have just agreed to Biden's proposed 3-week ceasefire. And if they'd done that 3-week ceasefire in Gaza, then they could have had a 3-week ceasefire with Lebanon, and that would have stopped the rockets for now. But I kind of thought that maybe what Israel wanted to do was continue to escalate until the Lebanese public basically forced Hezbollah to quit firing rockets into northern Israel. Right? I mean that was the other plausible scenario I saw to account for the Israeli escalation. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to a certain extent, but it's a, Hezbollah, I would say, is pretty distinctly non-responsive to the desires of the like broader Lebanese people, right? Like Hezbollah has its already existing military balance with Israel, so I think that the math it's doing, I think it is indeed afraid to escalate, in part because it really can't get much worse in Lebanon. If it does get much worse, I mean, we're talking about, again, it could really quickly, the whole country could quickly collapse, and that's not in Hezbollah's interest either, right?
Right.
But that's not necessarily Hezbollah being, constrained by public
I
opinion
see.
as much as being constrained by its desire to not live in a failed state.
But still, that's a sense in which, I mean, for that reason, Israel could expect that if they continue to escalate and do more and more damage to Lebanon, Hezbollah eventually ceases and desists and quits firing missiles into northern
Yeah.
Israel, and Israel can continue the war in Gaza.
Yeah, and it's worth, we've been talking a lot about other kind of countries' interests. It is worth pausing for a second to highlight the logic that Israel is claiming here, right? Which is that this has caused, and it has caused a lot of kind of emotional upheaval within Israel that they've forced. I think it's like 50 or 100,000 Israelis who live up in this border region have been continually displaced for the entire last year, right? And so there's this enormous political pressure on Netanyahu to do something about it and to restore deterrence in some way. I think that what he's doing right now will fail to restore deterrence and is more likely to make life worse in those regions. But it is worth remembering that there are powerful incentives that are helping to guide Israel's decision making here.
Yeah, it's just hard to say. I mean, both Hezbollah and Iran have seemed extremely reluctant to get very deeply involved militarily here, right? And
Yeah.
Iran, I kind of understand because I guess it was after the Israeli strike on the embassy compound in Syria that killed, high-ranking Iranian people, in addition to being an attack on an embassy and inherently escalatory. Iran, of course, sent a lot of missiles and drones Israel's way. Not much came of it. They were pretty successfully fought off by American provided defense missiles and so on. Um, there was some disagreement over whether Iran had really wanted a lot to get through. Right? I think they wanted to do more damage than we saw done. I mean, anyway, it came off as a failure by Iran. It seemed like
Right.
they'd actually spent a fair number of missiles, got nothing accomplished, and Israel had demonstrated that in the long run, Iran just doesn't have much power because, if you kind of extrapolate, if you ask, well, how many Iranian missiles would it take to wreak really substantial destruction on Israel? Well, given the fact that a fair number of missiles failed to do much of anything, seems like the answer is Iran could spend its whole arsenal and not win a war against Israel. Israel would easily
Yeah.
survive. That was my takeaway.
Well, that's the problem of being 2, 3 countries away from your mortal enemy, right? They've got to pass over Iraq on the way. They've got to pass over Jordan on the way. And that's the whole point. of having kind of allies in Lebanon like Hezbollah or in Syria
Hmm.
is to have the ability to strike from closer. That's what was so notable about that initial attack, is that it came from Iran. But again, if you're going to fire those things from Iran, there's a bunch of countries that have a strong interest in helping to knock them down. So yeah, I don't know what an Iranian escalation even particularly looks like, right? Are they, because if they send a volley of missiles over Jordan again, Jordan will again shoot them down. And is there a number that could get through and could do serious damage? It's possible, but we haven't seen that yet.
Well, you might think that increasingly, Israel's increasingly aggressive behavior makes it politically harder for Jordan to kind of, in effect, step in on behalf of Israel. But I guess as long as Jordan's as dependent as they are on the United States, they'll do what we insist on. Um, it's funny. It just seems like a couple of days ago, I was thinking, well, Israel, seems to just utterly dominate Hezbollah and Iran, and that the irony is that Israel, you know, that they justify the magnitude of the escalations by saying sometimes explicitly, well, these people are existential threats, right, to Israel. And yet the escalations prove that they're really not. I mean, Israel
Yeah.
has complete military dominance in the region. And I was thinking, like, well, if Hezbollah or Iran, like, really just wanted to send a signal, what could they do? And I thought, well, I guess they could just send a ton of missiles to one target, one high value target. Some would probably get through. And I thought, well, I guess they could try to kill Netanyahu. But then I thought, well, Hezbollah wouldn't do that, because then Netanyahu would try to kill Nasrallah. Well, that bridge has been crossed, right?
Yeah,
I
here we
mean,
go.
I'm half serious. Like, if I were Netanyahu, I don't think I'd be sleeping where I normally sleep for a while.
Oh
Uh,
no, certainly not. Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
but
but how are they going to actually get those missiles through, right? Like, they've got to, it's a question of intelligence too, not in the intellectual way, but in the military sense, right? Do they have access to Netanyahu's whereabouts at any given time? My sense right now is no, because why wouldn't they have taken a shot at him, right? That does make
mhm.
total sense in a war situation like that. Whereas Israel clearly has pretty sophisticated intelligence that has really deeply penetrated both Hezbollah and Hamas. So
Oh, totally.
I, I think that's part of the difference.
But I don't think they would have taken a shot at Netanyahu. This is a major norm violation. I mean,
Yeah,
in war, you don't, you by and large, you don't do that. I mean, presidents don't want to set that precedent of trying to
yeah,
kill the other country's president, and so it really is kind of a no-go place historically. And I guess Israel would say, well, Hezbollah is not a country. We
yeah,
killed the leader of Hezbollah, but that's not like, I don't know. But I don't think Hezbollah would have been the first, though, to break this norm. Now, on the other hand, who knows? I don't, it just seems harder and harder for Israel not to, for Iran not to do something major, and for Hezbollah not to do something major. But what can they do? I,
yeah,
I mean, I do think if they just swarm something with a ton of missiles, some missiles will get through. But, and I was told that there are kinds of missiles they haven't even used yet. They have used
for
some
sure.
ballistic missiles now, but there are some uh, things that I guess are more like cruise missiles that they haven't used yet.
Yeah,
Um,
they have more sophisticated missiles left, but I mean, it's challenging because this is Israel's whole defense doctrine. Its whole military doctrine is built around punching hard and hope and like believing that that will stop your enemy from responding, right? And it actually has worked reasonably well for them, right? And I think that in this case, we'll see if that logic plays out in practice, right? Because if they continue punching hard and they don't get the retaliation, then that's showing them that this is the successful strategy for winning wars in the Middle East or preventing wars in the Middle East.
yeah, I mean, it's worked for them in the short run. What it has also done is, I think, kept them from getting serious about trying to solve the long run,
Yeah,
the core problems, like the Palestinian issue.
certainly.
Um, and they've only exacerbated that. So I don't know. I mean, I guess we'd be fools to make predictions.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about Iranian politics to say whether Iran absolutely has to respond forcefully. It's hard to it is hard to imagine both Hezbollah and Iran standing by and doing nothing.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know. Well, it's weird too, because also while this is happening, you've got the president of Iran in the same building or same vicinity as Netanyahu, right? They're in New York for the General Assembly. It's
oh, that is where Bibi
everyone's
is
there
now,
right
isn't
now,
it?
which is about as weird as this could be, right? We've got this grand escalation happening that implicates all these different actors who are hanging out in New York right now. So I don't know. Must be weird conversations at the hotels.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of that, and we get into this a little in today's in the Earthling, today's issue of the news, the weekend edition of newsletter. Biden, along with France, have been trying to broker a ceasefire in Lebanon. Boy, does that seem like ancient history now. Um, but they said Bibi had agreed. They had gotten agreement from the prime minister's office or something, and now they say he reneged, and it may be that one reason he reneged is they decided, well, let's kill Nasrallah instead. But
Yeah.
um, the other question is like, okay, the one question is, what would it take for Hezbollah to really go all out, for Iran to really go out? What would it take for Biden to publicly complain? You know, um,
That question has been asked over and over again for the past year, and the answer is it's all but impossible. Right.
yeah, I've seen reports that Israel used bunker busting bombs provided by the United States to do
Yeah.
this. And, as an American, I'm just really not happy about this stuff. I mean, I gotta think it at least somewhat increases the chance of terrorism on our soil. Um, it doesn't take much terrorism to completely freak America out and significantly upset politics. I don't think Trump would have been elected in 2016 had there not been a few specific terrorist attacks that freak people out and they'd exploited. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, and
I,
it bears underlining too that the role that the U.S. plays in arming Israel isn't even just that we like send weapons to Israel, right? It's also that we literally have, and I had a piece talking about this and some other things a few months ago for Responsible Statecraft if people want to check it out. But the Israel actually has an American stockpile of weapons within its borders
mhm.
that they have fairly unique access to, that's guarded by American soldiers, that's held in American hands. But when a lot of these weapons transfers you're hearing about happen, they are literally handing, a thing within Israel's borders, handing it to Israel. And that very same day, that weapon may be used, either in
Hmm.
Gaza or in Lebanon now. So we're really talking about a level of involvement that is particularly deep and particularly direct.
So by the same token, does that mean we could stop the flow pretty quickly? I mean, um,
Certainly.
we could. So we have actually fairly short-term control over what Israel can do.
Well, I don't know. I mean, no one knows exactly what Israel has stockpiled, but America
Yeah.
has its own stockpile there.
Yeah.
That is also significant. So we could easily close the doors and say no more.
Uh-huh. Um, well, let's see. So what else is there? I mean, do you want to talk about the Alex Karp piece a little before we get into some of the stuff that's in the newsletter?
Yeah, let's do it.
So a lot of people haven't heard of him at all. So why don't you? I mean, and also I think for a lot of people, Palantir is this weird, creepy sounding company they
Yeah.
don't know much about, and it is a little mysterious. But so why don't you kind of start at the beginning?
Yeah, sure. So basically, so Alex Karp, to give a little bit of an idea of him. So of course, yes, he's the CEO of Palantir. He's this really interesting guy. Kind of starting with his background might be helpful. So he, grew up in Philadelphia. He grew up. That's probably too much background. he, uh, but the like his story for our purposes starts at Stanford. He meets Peter Thiel there. They become kind of
Well,
friends
but
through all these.
his childhood, it is interesting. He's of kind of ethnically mixed parentage, which is
Yeah,
interesting.
so he has one black parent and one Jewish parent. He grows
Okay.
up in this kind of hippie household, which is interesting. And he's got, some formative things about him are that he has dyslexia. He kind of doesn't do well in school initially, but turns out to be this very smart kid. Goes off to college at Haverford and then winds up at Stanford Law School and lives on the same floor as Peter Thiel, who was also attending that law school at the time. And then they become the best of friends, or at least good friends, during that time. Karp still considers himself kind of a hippie socialist, which is funny in retrospect for anyone who knows what Palantir is. And Thiel is as conservative as he's ever been. And then they part ways for a few years. Karp goes off on what can only be described as an odd tangent, does several years studying in Germany, getting a PhD in neoclassical social theory. So he's this really interesting guy. He thinks deep thoughts about the West is kind of maybe the best way to summarize it. And then
He thinks thoughts he considers deep. Do we know what the thoughts are? I mean,
that's the thing. I go back and forth on this. I think that Alex Karp is very, very smart. I think he is very, very smart. There is a real question as to whether the thoughts are so deep, but he studied with very famous social theorist Jürgen Habermas for at least some period in Germany.
uh-huh.
He learned German very quickly and wrote his dissertation in that language. There's something there. But he hated academia. He left academia, and then Peter Thiel, who came flush with cash from selling PayPal to eBay, he showed up one day and he said that he wanted to build this company to be called Palantir that was going to do surveillance and was going to help catch the bad guys and do, terrorist hunting stuff. But it was going to do it in line with civil liberties, right? That was the pitch. That was the original idea. And so that's about 2004, and Karp became CEO and grew it into what it is today, which is one of the biggest. It just got into the S&P 500 this past week, and it is probably it might be the biggest data analytics company,
Mm-hmm.
certainly in America.
Now, so it's, I first thought of it as almost a surveillance company, and to some extent it is, and it's used, for like border
Yeah,
control and stuff. But is it also involved in the kind of AI targeting business, which is, I gather, a kind of a probabilistic endeavor, right? There were these stories
yeah.
in the Israeli publication 972 about the targeting Israel was using in Gaza. It was very AI driven. And, I guess targeting is always, in a sense, probabilistic. But, it's like the AI is saying, well, there's X percent of chance that this person is a militant, X percent, cut it
Yeah.
off where you want. What do you want? 94%, 90. So, you decide and then kill everybody above that percentile.
Right.
That's kind of the idea, right?
So with Palantir, it's tricky. Well, first, maybe it's helpful to define exactly what makes Palantir unique or what makes Palantir so different from other companies, right? So like their big insight or their unique approach is that they don't just have a thing that they sell to you and that you apply. They send engineers into your organization, whether that be DoD related, some kind of military thing, or Citibank or something. And those engineers kind of look at all your data, try to create a dashboard that makes sense of it, right? And so it's customized for each individual client.
Hmm.
It happens that they started by doing this with a lot of military and police clients and things like that. So the way that their software works, kind of generally speaking, for police and military, is that it'll give you, let's say, whatever background information is available about an individual person you want to look up will be available there. You can have kind of a workflow for targeting that will show the characteristics of why they think this target is useful, and you can pull that up quickly and pass it through a chain of command quickly. It allows things like that. And they've started in recent years, kind of as you were hinting at there, incorporating AI to a greater degree and incorporating some AI tools that can help make probabilistic judgments about different things. But to be honest, at this point, we have a pretty limited amount of insight into what that's looked like.
Mhm. So, like, I mean, explain. I've become increasingly, well, it seems like Silicon Valley billionaires have become more publicly opinionated generally
Right.
than rich capitalists in days of yore. Um, and it seems like there are more people who have a stake in the military industrial complex who are in Silicon Valley, like say Mark Andreessen and Andreessen Horowitz. They fund a lot of startups. Some of them are in the military business in one sense or another. Um, and I've become aware of them being more vocal about an ideology that seems suspiciously synergistic with their desire to sell a lot of stuff to the Pentagon. I mean, hawkish. But so how does Karp rate along that dimension, and what's kind of distinctive about him?
Yeah, so I think he is, and this is kind of the hook of the piece, or the central argument of the piece, is that he is sort of the quintessential version of the Silicon Valley hawk, right? So he has uh, both the Beltway hawkishness, this feeling that we need to go out and protect democracy against autocracies abroad, that we need to have a muscular, strong America that's able to protect itself, and that there is something worth, there's a fundamental thing worth protecting that's like Western culture thing. And then he's got this tech optimism, or maybe like a super optimism, this kind of exaggerated trust in the ability of technology to bring humanity forward, right? So he mixes these different things together to have an ideology that basically says, you know, America is surrounded by enemies. They're terrifying enemies. They must be stopped. And the only way to stop them is to buy Palantir shit. Right. And to a certain extent, you go back and forth on whether that's sincere. I think in Karp's case, it probably is. I really do think that he feels quite emphatically about these broader ideas about like the need to protect the West and to protect these values. But there are, a number of examples of him doing things that are not exactly in line with someone who wants to protect Western values, like civil liberties, for example. It's a
Right,
surveillance company.
right.
So it's this interesting combo. But he is the most bombastic. And it's worth watching, for
Yeah,
listeners who haven't seen Karp speak. He's got this almost stochastic way of talking. Ideas kind of click against each other, right? And it's interesting to listen to, but it's made him a real darling of the kind of national security elite in the U.S.
yeah. No, yeah, you really should check him out on video. He's vibrant, he's dynamic, and he, to me, comes off as borderline crazy. I mean, he says a lot of just extreme shit, right?
Yeah,
Which increasingly is like encouraged in our whole like social media. I don't know if he's much on social media, but increasingly the people who say the most extreme shit become famous and influential. So
yeah.
why not? But he's good at that.
Yeah,
Um,
he's a provocateur, and he's also, I mean, I think a certain amount of the crazy shit that he says has to do with, we talked about this kind of group, you're talking about this group of Silicon Valley billionaires, and a lot of them have been particularly radicalized in the last year by October 7th and everything that happened after it, right? A lot of
uh-huh.
them have gone from being moderately vocal to extremely vocal and extremely
Hmm.
kind of definitive about how the world works and how we need to stand up for Western values and how Israel's doing that, right? So yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that from a lot of different people. So there are less prominent people in Silicon Valley that have been big in this. People like Sean McGuire, people not Silicon Valley, but like Bill Ackman has been prominent in this. And Alex Karp has gone from being, moderately prominent to suddenly being even more out there, and being
Yeah,
out there in a way where he's talking about, quote unquote, pagan forces that are underlying Gaza protests, and talking about, how he should send students who protest to North Korea for like, uh, you know, summer camp or whatever. These kind of things, these provocative statements that maybe he wouldn't have said before, but you know, now he's
yeah.
fired up.
No, it's funny. I mean, since you first proposed this story, he's become, I would say, significantly more prominent. So you
I
have a
agree.
good sense for these things, I guess. I mean, he's been on Bill Maher, he's been profiled by Maureen Dowd. He's become, and Palantir hit the S&P 500 last week, as you said.
Yeah.
So anyway, people should check it out. There's a lot of stuff about him. And he is representative of an increasingly common type, I think, in Silicon Valley, increasingly influential type.
Yeah, totally.
So I guess we should talk about some of the stuff in the newsletter.
Probably
I
a
don't know.
good idea.
What do you want to start with?
This was a free preview of Earthling Unplugged. To unlock the rest of this conversation and other exclusive audio content, become an NCN member at nonzero.substack.com.